evening to all our postgraduate students and welcome back to tonight's session. We are looking at the second part of developing the aim, purpose, objectives and research questions. And I'm Professor Jeanette Maritz, if you maybe did not attend last night. I'll be facilitating the session the same as last night. And other than a warm welcome, I'd just like to thank you for your active participation in last night's session with your questions. And I'm going to use that as a start off for tonight's session as well. There were some very interesting questions asked, some a bit wider than the scope of what the aim of the workshop is, but I thought still relevant. And because of the time last night, we maybe didn't have time to ponder on them long enough, but I did pick up some needs and some aspects that we could maybe clarify to assist you. So in the first few slides, I'll be going over some of the questions that was posed last night. Right, so please enjoy. I'm going to not share my camera now for the presentation, but we will chat again after the slides presentation. So as last night I mentioned, please have a notebook, pen, paper, or any other means of taking notes with you. Jot down questions you have, some things if you might need clarification, and please post them in the Q&A or section, and we can talk about it after the session. So here we go. All right, so in last night's session, there were several very interesting questions posed. And some of them I just wanted to stand still and just spend a few minutes on them. So sorry if the slide is a bit full, but I thought I will rather say more than less regarding the question how to structure a literature review. It's maybe a bit out of the scope of our session, but I think what is important here is that we look at the principles that is relevant even when we are writing our introduction, our background, our problem statement. And when we are doing a more formal literature review, one of the questions was, how do we structure a literature review? Now, remember, you'll be using literature in your background, your introduction, your background, your problem statement, and in your justification. There was also a question around what's the difference between a motivation and a justification, and we're going to get to that as well. Now, that's a very important question, and what we aim to do in any of our writing, we mentioned last night again, is that we look at a logical, congruent structure. Now, the same would go for your literature. Whether it be in your literature review section or whether it be when you start discussing literature in your background or in your problem statement, there's a very important principle of organizing your ideas. And the same is with the literature review. We want to organize our ideas to make it easier for the reader to read our proposal or ultimately our dissertation or our thesis. So there are different ways that you could consider structuring your literature review. It depends on you. It depends on maybe how you are presenting your topic, what is your focus area, or from which angle are you starting to address your topic. So, and the same would go for anything that you write. Organizing it logically is very, very important. So here are 5 options that you could potentially consider when writing up your literature review or your background or your problem statement. You could be reading your literature and then start organizing what you have read according to themes that you have identified. Now, this is very similar to doing a thematic analysis in qualitative research. You would follow the same process. You would be reading, well, searching, reading your literature, and certain themes might come to the fore. And you might then decide that you want to structure your literature review according to the themes as they related to your questions or hypothesis or what you found while reading and thinking about your literature. So this approach helps to demonstrate how each theme contributes to understand the broader research problem. However, in some cases, it might be best to do it in a chronological form and arrange your sources, for instance, by publication date to show the development of ideas or theories or findings over time. And this is particularly useful for highlighting shifts in the fields or emerging trends. Example of deciding to do something in a chronological order. Say, for instance, you were looking at trends of, say, people going for flu vaccinations prior to COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. So there would be a chronological organization, say from 2018 to 2024, for instance, or 2023. So you could have a chronological organization. Or you could have a methodological organization. You could base your report based on how the literature used different methods in their study. And this can be particularly useful when different methodology leads to different findings or interpretations within the same area of research. So you can, for instance, while you're looking at the literature, you in any event need to look at the context of the paper that you're reading and where the research took place and the methods and methodologies they used. And within that, you might realize that quantitative studies focused on A, B, and C, yet qualitative studies looked at D, E, and F with some overlap or some distinctions, and you might even find a gap in that. Then you could also organize according to your theoretical frameworks. So you can so there's two options. Sometimes we discuss the theoretical frameworks in additional chapter, or it can be done in your literature review, where you look at the theoretical frameworks that studies employ, and you might then aim to critique or expand on these existing theories, or find or think you might have found a gap, and you can then situate your research in that. And then lastly, there could be a sectoral or geographical organization. So it could be, for instance, that you are looking at different sectors like health, education, or geographically focused. And I think we talked about that last night briefly, about transferring a study to a different geographical area, especially when there are regional differences relevant to the topic. So, study might have been done in a urban setting in Gauteng, and you think that there's a similar problem in a rural area. However, there are different aspects that might implicate in a rural setting that maybe wasn't found in an urban setting. So there are many other ways as well, but I think these are the most typical ways in how we structure our literature review. You could also structure your literature review according to the concepts and the phenomena that you decided on. So what are the concepts in your title? You might then depart from working from the concepts, if there is a logical order to them. If not, That could be another way of organizing your literature. So the same would go when you address or write about your background to the problem and your problem statement, that there's a logical organization of ideas. And that will also hold hands with how you write academically. We want paragraphs to hold hands. And if you have a paragraph that looks at research that has been done around your topic, each paragraph might address a different aspect of the problem, but all the paragraphs need to basically hold hands if you want to envisage a metaphor, so that they make up an argument, or provides evidence for the statements that you make. So the principle around this is that we want to organize our ideas. Sometimes it's useful to use a mind map or to jot down ideas and see and have a look at patterns emerging while you're reading the literature or refining your topic. All right, so just a little bit more information, but I think it was a valuable question last night. I gave you an example of a qualitative study last night in terms of what it looks like if there is the aim or purpose, then the objectives and the questions, and how they also logically follow each other. And so this is just an example of a study that has a hypothesis. Say, for instance, the topic was to study the effect of urban green spaces on air quality improvement in metropolitan areas. Your hypothesis might be urban green spaces significantly reduce the concentration of airborne particulate matter. And this is now very technical in surrounding urban environments. Remember, we said last night that your objectives each objective might then have a different methodology. And in this study, the study description, they say how they're going to go about to test the hypothesis. And that, to see if there is an increase in the area of urban green spaces leading to measurable improvements in air quality, specifically in reducing particulate matter. So you'll also now see that the terms are repeating itself. All right, so there is already that holding of hands and that logical congruence. And then they tell us how they will do it. They will compare the air quality measurements from a densely populated urban area with varying amounts of green spaces, and they'll use air quality sensors that will collect data on particulate matter concentrations at different distances from green spaces in each city. And then additional factors such as traffic density, industrial activity, and meteorological conditions will also be considered to isolate the effect of green spaces on air quality. And then they conclude to say this study could contribute to environmental planning and public health policy by providing evidence of the benefits of urban green spaces in mitigating air pollution in cities. Now, one of the questions last night was, and I think quite a valuable question, that asked, so what is the difference between a justification and a motivation in a study? So the area that I've highlighted in blue, quickly form an opinion on whether you think this is a justification or is this a motivation for the study. So quickly jot down or keep it in your mind what you think this is. Is this a justification or if this is a motivation for the study? And in the next slide, I'm going to try and give you the theory around what is a justification and what's a motivation. And then you can assess yourself whether you were correct in deciding whether this is a justification or a motivation. So let's have a look. A motivation is the reason behind conducting a study. So it's often driven by your interest, curiosity, or the perceived importance of a topic within a broader academic or practical context. So a motivation addresses why a topic is worth investigating and what the researcher hopes to achieve or learn from the study. Now, what is very important here is that the words researcher interest, curiosity, and then this tentative hope that you hope to achieve or learn from the study. So it's closely linked to your underlying passion, concern, or a need that prompts you to delve into a particular subject area. However, a justification involves providing a rationale for why the research is necessary, and this is the difference based on gaps in existing literature, practical needs, or societal issues. So what is the major difference is that the justification is based on evidence. It is less of a hope, it's less of a contemplative interest. It now needs to be based on existing literature, and that requires evidence for your argument to support the need for a study, and explaining why it's important to address your research questions or problems that you posed. So a justification validates the study's contribution to existing knowledge, addresses a problem, or, for instance, influences on a policy. Now, if we went back to the previous slide, you can now, based on what I just showed you, reevaluate whether this last sentence is a motivation or a justification. So those of you who thought that this is a motivation would be quite correct. And we can see that it's a motivation because there are no empirical evidence stated. It is a tentative future voice. The study could contribute. So it is a hope of what someone thinks it might do in future, but it is not yet based on evidence. So this last sentence would be a motivation for the study, not a justification. We could turn it into a justification if we, based on your problem statement, argue for the study based on evidence and literature presented. So I hope that clarifies what's the difference between a motivation and a justification on the study, but I thought it would be quite valuable to also understand the difference when we move on. And I also wanted you to understand the difference because we will unpack. Someone also asked for a breakdown of what a proposal, for instance, would consist of. And I'm going to address that, and then we'll come back to the motivation and justification. Then another question that I was asked, that I promised I'll give you the links, and that was how to identify the top journals in your discipline or in your field. So last night, I tongue-in-cheek said use Google to find leading journals. But it's a good place to start off. Just be careful what you ask Google, because based on how you frame your question is what you're going to get. So I hope by this time you know what's your field and discipline that you're working in. So you could ask Google what are the 5 or the 10 best journals in the field of for instance, nursing or nursing education or environmental studies or accounting or whatever the field might be. And that might be a useful springboard. But once it gives you those journals, the following are things that you can do to check whether these journals are, first of all, legit, and then how they rank. So you can check a journal's impact factors. I've given you the link. It's this SkyMo website where you can put in the journal's name and have it search the journal. It will then come up with all the statistics of that particular journal. It will give you the journal name, where the journal is situated, which country. It will give you the scope of the journal. You can also from that visit the journal site directly. But very importantly, it gives you the journal's H factor or impact factor. So the H indexes, the citations, and therefore the journal ranking. And what is also nice about this, it will tell you, so the ranking, it will tell you whether it's a Q1, 2, 3, or 4 journal, or if you can't find it on this platform, then the journal isn't ranked. It might still be a peer-reviewed journal, but it might not be a ranked journal. And some of the South African journals might not make it onto this list. It's not to say that they're not peer-reviewed and that they're not acceptable. They're just not ranked, or their H index might be too low to be ranked yet. And then you can also ask recommendations from peers and mentors or your supervisor. And you can also analyze published articles. You can have a look at their reference section. What journals did they use? So when you find an article that's, the best article you've yet found on your topic or your research interest, go to the reference section and see which journals they used and which of those are maybe high-ranking journals, and that you can also then start from there. So this is just by the by, but I thought it was a useful question, because the principle remains GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you read garbage for your topic, for your research problem, your justifications, then there's garbage going out. So it would make sense that you would choose the best journals and the best journals in your field, or the best authors or experts on your topic, and start from there. That already places your research at the top of the current discourses which we would want. And it also then helps you to, if you then wanted to submit your research to a journal, that you already have identified the top journals where you want to place yourself and your research. So that's just a promise from last night. I said I'll give you the link, and the link will be available on the slides. Then there was another question to please give you an indication of what a proposal or a chapter 1 might look like. And this is a very generic outline, but probably most of your proposals or chapter 1, maybe 2, would more or less look like this. So obviously you'll have a title page, so you'll have your title of your study or a working title of your proposal, your name, your supervisor's name, maybe your department, the date of the proposal. So that's usually just your title page. Then there might be an abstract, a brief summary of the proposal, but please do the abstract last. Even I remember last night we spoke about the logical flow, but sometimes the logic ends up being logically in our writing, but maybe not in the process of our thinking. Now, the abstract is a typical example of this. Wait to write your abstract at the end, once you've teased out your research, and then once you've done all the other steps, then it's easy to do a summary of the proposal. So do that last, but it's usually presented first. There's always an introduction. Now, some disciplines have an introduction, just a general introduction to the document, and then they might have a separate section which has the background information and the separate heading for the statement of the problem. Or it can all be in the introduction. So you would have the background to the study, you will have the statement of the problem, potentially also the justification for the problem or the motivation for the research. So it might be separate headings, or it might fall under the information under the heading of introduction. Then your study, based on your problem statement, will then go to your aim or purpose. Remember last night I said an aim and a purpose is the same thing, but please decide either to use the one or the other and then use it consistently. From your aim, you'd have your objectives, 1, 2, or 3. There might be more objectives related to the aim of your study. Remember, we also said that the aim is a larger, a more general statement in terms of what the outcome of your study is, and the objectives are the steps that you're going to take to achieve your aim or your purpose. Then based on your objective, you'll have your research questions that are aligned to your research objectives. Then you might have a literature review, and that could also include your theoretical frameworks. You might have this as a section in your, when it's a proposal, definitely. Once you write up your chapters, this can then move to a chapter on its own. But for your proposal, you will have to refer and situate your study within the literature. Then you'll briefly discuss your research methodology. Another word for research methodology is sometimes they refer to it as your research design and methods, but it's the same as a methodology. So again, choose which one you want to use and just use it throughout your study. And then this might include will include your research design, your population, your sample, your sampling method, your data collection methods, your data analysis plan, and your ethical considerations for your study. Then you might have a separate heading for the significance of the study. Remember, your significance of the study would be more aligned to writing a motivation. So sometimes they have a heading motivation. That would be a tentative projection of what would the study deliver. At the end of your research, you can then maybe give a more pertinent significance of the study with evidence. But in the beginning of your proposal, it is something that you are tentatively putting out there, what might be the significance, because you haven't done the study yet. Then definitely it will include references, and the departments sometimes have different referencing uses that they use. Some use APA, some use Harvard. There might be other referencing conventions, so please acquaint yourself with the referencing convention in your department and align and be consistent in terms of your referencing. And then your proposal might or will have appendices that might be your letter or your information letters, your consent forms, your data gathering instrument, confidentiality agreements. Those might be appendices to your proposal. I can contemplate some questions might come up in terms of how long should a proposal be. The average length for a master's proposal is probably between about around 25 pages, and a PhD might go up to 40 or 50 pages. But please also clarify this within your department. that it might differ, but around 25. So your ability to write succinctly is a skill that you need to master early on in your research. So I always say, write your heart out and then start editing for your final proposal. And then you evaluate what information is critical, what can I put together, how can I write it more succinctly. So please remember that your supervisor, if they're anything like me, I supervise more than 20 students, so I don't have time to read proposals of 60 or 100 pages at a time. And also the scientific committee might limit the pages, or the ethics committee might limit the number of pages. So that's just a more or less a figure. Please find out in your departments what is the required length of your proposal. Okay, so that's just going back to some of the questions that was posed last night, and also the just maybe a process of just orientating those that weren't in last night's session to what we were speaking about. The next slide, I just thought it might be helpful for you to have a checklist in terms of what you must make sure that the topics that we are addressing in the conceptualization phase that we're now discussing, that you have kind of a checklist where you can make sure that you have all the information that is necessary under each section. So this is really just a short checklist. You could go into more detail, but we would, your title is usually checked in terms of, is it concise and is it informative? So by concise, are you saying in the least possible words what you attempt, what are you focusing on, what are you investigating, who's the target population, what's the phenomena, or your key terms that you are investigating. When we say concise, usually a title should not be longer than 15 words. The reason for the 15 words, it has to do with indexing from the libraries across the world. So they request for 15 words. So you need to be succinct in that as well. And I know there will be questions around, oh, but my study is 18 words, what do I do now? You need to refine, but also please clarify with your supervisor. But the international number of words in a title is around 15. They won't throw out or not accept your study if it's 16 words, but please try and have a concise title or a working title. And then, very important, does the title accurately reflect the study's focus? The title is very, very important because I always talk about a hypnotic patter. You know, if you hypnotize someone, you say the same words over and over again until they fall asleep. Now, the same principle goes with your title, your aims, objectives, and your questions. They need to contain the same terminology, concepts throughout. So don't replace certain concepts with other words. You want that hypnotic pattern, and it starts from your title. So moving on from your title, it could be your introduction, like we said just now. That could include your background information. Your research problem needs to be clearly articulated. We spoke about that last night. We said we could use the 5 questions of what, when, why, how, and where of the problem, and then you can be sure you've articulated it extensively. You also, in your problem statement, need to identify what's the gap in the existing knowledge. So meaning, what is the gap in literature? There could also be, for instance, a gap in practice or a gap in policy, but you need to identify what is the gap in knowledge and where is your study then situated. And then does the problem statement justify the need for the study? So going back to our previous explanation, yeah, you are going to need to justify. So you are going to need to argue with evidence to justify your need for your study. The justification, to find out what the justification is once you've written your problem statement, is to ask yourself, so what? And it's a very important question that you need to remember whenever you write something in your research, is ask yourself, so what? If you can't answer the so what, then it's not worth doing. I had a reviewer review article of mine this year, and in one of my findings, I said the finding is A, B, and C, and they said, so what? So it's not just my thing. It's a very important question. So what? Because that so what will be your justification or your argument around why there is a need for your study. So keep on asking you when you write something, so what about this? And I've seen people that use language model learning platforms such as ChatGPT, and they will put in their problem statement and ask it, so what, so what, so what, at least 4 times. And then you really know that you're at the crux of it. And now I know there's going to be a question around, can you use ChatGPT? But please sort it out with your supervisor. I'm not against it. It's how you use it. Then it would be followed by your aims. So is the aim clearly, is there a clear primary aim of the research? And does the aim address the research problem? So remember I said that there needs to be a pattern. So from the title to the research problem to the aims, they need to hold hands and they need to speak to each other. Then also very important, your objective or objectives. Are the objectives specific and measurable? Now, when you are doing a qualitative study, it's less about being measurable, but the objectives need to be specific. They need to have an action verb, and the action verb will depend on the type of your research design, what action verbs you use. So there's different action verbs for qualitative studies, and there's different action verbs for quantitative studies. Please go and look at those. Then do the objectives directly support the research aim? Are they achievable within the scope and resources available? And that's what I spoke about last night in terms of what is achievable in the time frame for a master's study and what's achievable in the time frame of a PhD study. And that clearly would have an influence on the objectives, the number of the objectives, and the scope of the objectives. So please keep in mind the time you have available, be realistic in terms of what you can achieve and what not, what is too ambitious, and be very clear that you have the resources available to achieve this. Now, when we talk about resources, I'm not only talking about the resource of time, but also in terms of budget. So the more objectives, the more. The more objectives, the more data. The more data, the more the analysis. The more the interpretation, the more the write-up, the more editing, and each of those cost money. So please think about, make provision for the necessary resources, and look at funding opportunities to help you to achieve your research. And we'll talk about how you can go about that even as early as your proposal stage, how you can, what strategies you can use to attract funding, because the resources gives you the opportunity to execute your research or not. Then your research questions, they need to be specific and clearly formulated, and they need to align with the objectives and the aim of the research. This is now just remember, we are just looking at the conceptualization phase. So I'm just giving you a checklist item on our focus in terms of what these yesterday and today's workshop is about. It's up to your research questions. So I think if you look at the checklist items, you will realize that there needs to be alignment between each of these sections. They each hold hand. You can't start using suddenly different key concepts in your objectives that maybe wasn't in your title, or that wasn't covered in your research problem, or you can't introduce new research questions that's not aligned to your objectives. So the secret here is that there's alignment, and that there's logical internal and external congruence. And what I mean by external congruence, these headings that you see here is your external congruence. The headings have a logical flow to it, or it follows logically. The internal coherence is what you write under each of these titles or headings. So don't write under your objectives, your research problem, or under your questions have objectives. Make sure that you have the right information under the headings, and we refer to that as internal logic. All right, so I think we've covered most of what we did last night and recapped. So the next few slides is new information, and it just takes our discussion a bit wider. So we're going to look at the importance of considering sustainable development goals, for instance, or universities' catalytic niche areas in your research proposals. I've highlighted the sustainable development goals as one of the more overarching worldwide prompts in terms of going forward, but there might be others as well. But the SDGs are generally important for funding, and the university's catalytic niche areas are very important to see if and how your study aligns to these larger thrusts and areas of identified research for the future. So sustainable development goals, if you don't know about it yet, please go and read about it. It is the United Nations sustainable development goals that we're speaking of. I think there is around 13 or 14 SDGs at the moment. Some of them refer to health, education, food security, safety. There's quite a number. So please go and have a look what the SDGs are, and see if you can situate your study in one of these SDGs, or more than one. You could potentially fit into more than one. So I'm currently, my niche area of research is postgraduate supervision. And the work that I do fall within health, because I'm looking at the mental health of students. It also falls in quality education, and it also falls in technology. So the work that I do fall in 3 SDGs. And when you apply for funding, whether it is internal or with external organizations, it is a very strong motivator for a successful application if you can show how your work falls within one or more of the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we'll talk about the university's catalytic niche areas in a moment. So why is it important? It ensures that your research is relevant and that it impacts global and local challenges. It increases your funding chances, aligning strategic goals, and we've spoken about that. It enhances your academic work because it focuses on broad societal contributions. It also fosters interdisciplinary collaboration and enriches research comprehensively. Definitely boosts your career prospects because you are addressing critical issues. And then it promotes innovative thinking, expanding methodological boundaries. So remember, we said in our first phase of our research, which is the conceptual phase, and we focused on Bloom's taxonomy with levels of thinking and thinking critically and innovatively, working within the Sustainable Development Goals enhances your research in terms of the impact and not just in terms of knowledge, but also a societal contribution and a global contribution to the work that you're doing. So please go and read on the Sustainable Development Goals if you don't know about them yet. Please try and situate your study within that. And that's also a very good source of motivation and justification for your research. So if you can say, you know, my research falls into the sustainable goal number 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals, you can already see that there's a very strong justification and motivation as well for why your study is worth doing. And also answers the so what question. So what if we do this? If I do this, it will contribute to the SDG number 1, 2, and 3, or whatever the case might be. So looking at broader societal impacts in terms of these goals. Then also other goals in terms of the university's catalytic niche areas. And it's very important for the postgraduate students so that you know where you fit in within the university's research agenda. So the research agenda and the catalytic niche areas of UNISA is guided by the VC's goal in an inauguration in 2021. And she said, one of my priorities, the extent to which public research can galvanize the university community and enhance its collaboration with the wider community. Our thinking as we engage with these niche areas will also benefit from active reflection on the theme of the VC's talk, naming Reclaiming Africa's Intellectual Futures. So sorry about the dots that cover the intellectual, but it's part of the background of the slide, and it actually indicates the Southern African part of the continent, but there's some wording across it, so please excuse that. But that is why we have the niche areas in UNISA as we have it, because it is part of the VC's vision for UNISA and galvanizing the university's communities. So why are we promoting the specifications of UNISA's catalytic niche areas? Again, we're harnessing grant attainment possibilities, so greater possibilities for grants, addressing the legacy of underrepresentations of equity priority groups within specific disciplines. We're giving structured attention to societal priority areas. And we're also directing the university's research agenda. So there's important reasons for why we are showing you an overview of UNISA's catalytic niche areas. So there are 10 catalytic niche areas, and they cover marine studies, aviation and aeronautical studies, automotive, energy, space study and square kilometer array, the fourth industrial revolution and digitization, the natural sciences, the biotechnology studies. We had a question last night. Health studies and medicine, feminist, womanist, Busadi theorizations, and then finally student support and co-curricular activities. Now, the research that I just mentioned, what my niche area is, I'm looking at postgraduate supervision support, so it falls in area 10 of UNISA's catalytic niche areas. Some of my students' research, however, falls within the health studies and medicine because I'm from that department. So you would see that hopefully you fall somewhere or your research might somewhere fall within the catalytic niche areas. You might now come and say, oh, but I'm a student in the business and economic sciences. Where do I find myself? There's always ways that you can link your studies in some way or another to these catalytic niche areas. So please give it some thought. Ask your supervisor. I know as supervisors, we now need to report with our reporting about our postgraduate students' progress. We need to state in which D8 niche area your studies fall. At times they might ask for the SDGs. Does it fall within a SDG? Or in which catalytic niche area your study falls. So please think about these and consider it when you're also writing your proposal, or start thinking about where to situate your study. And then just lastly, why is the conversations necessary in the different colleges? We want to ensure that we have explored the rich potential and identified niche areas. As members of the UNISA community, we are all responsible for contributing to the theme of reclaiming Africa's intellectual futures in various ways and in our diverse spaces. The catalytic niche areas speak to issues that affect us all, and these issues demand a collective institutionalized response. Sorry, the dots are over the word again. And active engagement with the catalytic niche areas offers opportunities for us and for you, our M&D students, to participate in this project in an institutionalized and, guess what the word is again, coherent way. So, having said that, I've come to the end of the slides and the end of the theorizing part of tonight's session. I want to thank you all, and we will soon go to the question and answer session. I just would like to take you back. I also promised you to give you the resource of a research book that I mentioned last night. That it's a South African book. It is, I think, quite a worthwhile purchase. So I'm just going to quickly scroll through some slides because I put it with the resources of last night. So sorry about the clicking forward. But this is the book that I mentioned. It is Rustenburg, Strydom, and Fouchier are the editors, and it's called Research at Grassroots for the Social Sciences and Human Services Professions. So if you're in economic sciences or any other fields, it would still work for you. And the part on the literature review organization I mentioned last night, there's a very nice part in this book on page 112 about organizing your literature review. So you might know of the book. It was usually the first editor was Strydom, and then later it was Fouchier. It's now Rustenburg, the 2021 edition. Please just a note on using current and relevant sources. It is very important that we use the latest research books. So please try and get the latest editions, not old editions. So this is the latest edition of Research at Grassroots, the 2021 edition. So if you do purchase books, or you take especially methodological books from the library, please make sure that you use the latest editions. We don't want to see books that was written in 2002. It's now 2024. The same with your articles. Please use current articles. So I would, for my students, I say current is the last 3, maximum 5 years. The reason for that being is that you must remember that it's going to take you a number of years to complete your study. So if you now already have studies of, say, for instance, 2017, 2018, by the time you graduate in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, those resources will be dated, and you need to redo it in any event before you hand in your dissertation or thesis, or before you can publish. So please spare yourself the agony of needing to redo and update your sources at the end, because you didn't from the beginning use recent resources. So you can also fight with me or fight with a supervisor, but I don't allow my students to use resources older than maximum 5 years, and usually I prefer 3 if they're just starting. So very important when you are doing your literature review, or when you are working with evidence, that you please make sure that it's the latest resources that you are using. All right, so are we going to go over to the question and answer session? Please give me a chance just to go to the questions, and we can then take it from there. I'd just like to make an announcement on behalf of the organizers to let you know that tomorrow evening session is cancelled. A new date will be communicated to you, but there won't be a session tomorrow evening. They will reorganize and let you know about the new date for tomorrow's session. So please then, tomorrow you've got the evening free, so you can now really spend some time in thinking about your proposal, reading about your problem statement, practicing that, because you've got a few hours free. So please use it constructively. You've already put it aside for your research. So then the very first, or some of the questions, that was exactly what I was anticipating, but we'll talk about it again. So Anonymous said, Prof, my research encompasses a substantial examination and evaluation of human rights policies on all scales. Will a systematic review approach be adequate, or should I explore alternative methods? Well, it would depend whether it's a master's or a PhD study in the first place. If it's a master's study, a systematic literature review would be quite adequate. If you're doing a PhD, I would imagine that your literature review would be one of the first steps in terms of what might be your outcome at the end. So if it's a PhD study, if you do a systematic review, or you do a review of policies and you have your answer, then what would be the outcome of your study, or what would be your unique contribution? So a systematic literature review, just for those that's maybe new and don't know what's the difference between a literature review and maybe a systematic or a scoping review. There's different types of literature reviews. So we've just generally talked about reviewing literature for our background and our problem statement, but there are also methodologies that we can use in doing a literature review. So there's different types of literature reviews, And what Anonymous is asking is around a specific type of a literature review, and a systematic literature review is a very methodical way and quite a high level thinking way of gathering evidence and doing your literature review. So it's quite involved. It has a specific method to it. But my answer in short for you would be it would depend firstly if it's an M or a D, and then yeah. For master students, you could do a systematic review, and that could be your master's dissertation. Because it has its own methods. For a PhD study, it's always useful to have a specific type, whether it is a scoping review or it is a systematic review or any of the other reviews on a PhD level. I hope that answers your question. Is there a difference between the research proposal and the research outline? The outline, a research outline is the order of your research proposal and the headings. So you write a research proposal, and the outline that I've given you now is your headings that will make up your research proposal. So hope that clarifies. Is there a specific number of sources, articles, and journals that one can use? Usually, there wouldn't be a specific number that is laid down in a proposal or in a final dissertation or a thesis. Where you might have this is some journals might say that you can only use a maximum of 40 resources, but usually that's not, there isn't a maximum for your proposal usually, or your dissertation or thesis. Yeah, so I would say a minimum for a proposal would be at least 15, maybe more, definitely not less than that. So you would need to have done at least a fairly basic grounding in terms of the literature that you read. I would suggest more, but I would say at least that number. But if you want to clarify also with your supervisor, but usually there's no upper limit. Usually, yeah, we also don't necessarily communicate a lower limit. I'm just saying, in terms of the thoroughness of at least placing your study within the context of knowledge on a master's level. Yeah, I would go between the minimum 15 to 25 or 30. Would give you a good grounding. I hope that helps. I might have missed a part yesterday, but can you, on a very high level, talk to me about sampling methods of mixed method research and the core designs? For that's really, yeah, I'll really give you a very high level because that's a workshop. So I think it's a 3-day workshop on its own. But what we did say about mixed methods last night is that we usually don't advocate for the use of mixed methods in a master's study due to the time and the resource constraint, because you would be following 2 very specific designs that will be executed fully on their own. So there will be a quantitative component, there will be a qualitative component, and there needs to be an integration of those 2 aspects at some time. Now, that is the hallmark of different types of mixed methods. It can be sequential, it could be congruent, it could be larger quantitative, smaller quantitative, or the other way around. So there are quite a number of types of mixed methods, but in essence, you would have virtually an entire study design that's quantitative with every aspect. It would have its own objectives, it would have its own questions, its own design, own methods, own reporting, and the same would go for the qualitative study, the same. And then you need to integrate, because that's the hallmark of a mixed methods, is the integration of the methods and the findings at the end. So the methods you would, in terms of your paradigm, you will be working in a pragmatic paradigm, so overall it would possibly be a pragmatic paradigm, but you will still follow the designs of each in full. So the sampling methods would align to the design. So in the quantitative aspect, you might have you use surveys, and you might have a randomized sampling selection, or one of the sampling measures that is congruent with what information you want. Qualitative sampling would be purposeful in most cases, where you would have inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then seek participants that measure up to that criteria, and then you will follow it up with observations, interviews, focus groups, or whatever you then decide is going to be your way of data collection, and then based on the findings, integrate those. So yes, it is a high level, and that's really just the basics. This is the question I expected. Dear Prof, Civil Engineering Department belongs to which of the areas? And I think you're now referring to the areas in terms of the catalytic niche areas. Civil engineering can really fit in with, and this is where the creativity comes. In terms of civil engineering, you can actually place yourself in most of the science areas. Let's just go back to the niche areas. Let's have a look. But I definitely, sorry for scrolling through, I knew there would be questions around this. So this is where your creativity comes in. You can, for instance, with your civil engineering, fall in any of the first 7 areas. Well, yeah, even health. Other than 9 and 10, you can potentially find yourself in one of the 8 areas. It's just about how you link your research to that area. And if you really go and think about it, you could potentially fall in any other of those. So it's not to say that civil engineering falls into that area and that is it. That's not the case. It is about how you could potentially contribute to one of the areas. So it's not a hard and fast rule as to where exactly you might find yourself and where you fall into it. So I think those are the questions. Oh no, there are a few others that came up. With the literature review, can one adopt to ensuring a quality written review and a high writing style in terms of flow, and minimize the use of literature just as it is? Musa, you're quite right. When we spoke about the literature review last night, or using literature, from the beginning, it needs to be on a level, critical thinking level. So last night I said we don't merely want descriptions. By saying A said this, B said that, we want a critical look at the literature. In other words, we want to compare and contrast. What is the same? What does literature or research say that's the same? What does research say that is different? And where might I then fit into that? So literature never is a simple description. well, in many cases, people write it that way. But what we would like is to have a high level discussion and thinking critically around what the literature and research has produced. And where do you fit in? So definitely, when you talk about a high writing style, and I think what you're referring there is an argumentative form of writing where you have a statement, you gather evidence, and then you reach a conclusion. And that style of writing requires critical thinking. So if you're talking about a high writing style, that would be a style where you critically look at what the literature is, what the studies have been done. You critically analyze, even when you are looking at an article or reading an article, you need to critically analyze what methods did they use. Was it scientifically grounded? Is their findings, is the findings believable? So even in just reading an article, you are already required to be critical. And then writing it in your literature review, what is its place? You need to conceptualize that. You need to argue that. And that is definitely on a higher order thinking level, and also on a more critical level, which would then produce a quality writing piece. But I do agree with you that, and I think we touched on that last night as well. What happens when you are citing older sources to give a historical background to your study? That's completely in order. Remember, we talked about historical studies or historical literature review yesterday as well. So if you are showing over a period of time, obviously you're going to include historical sources. So historical sources are in order if they are older, and if you are talking about a historical background or timelines, that would be in order. Also, older sources that are known as key writings. For instance, last night we spoke about Bloom's taxonomy. And that was already written in the 60s. So if I'm writing about the development of Bloom's taxonomy, I might quote the very first article that was written, or maybe a conference proceeding of Bloom, and then how it developed up to 2020 or whatever the case might be. So that the recent sources that I mentioned does not exclude the very original text. You'll often find older resources when you are quoting and talking or writing about theoretical frameworks. Current discourses, what I'm talking about is what is currently happening in the field. And that would be important in terms of situating your study. All right, so I hope that clarifies it. Which niche area does law fall into? It can fall into any of those areas, because law is, it doesn't matter what niche area you're looking at. Law has some aspect in it. So you might and that's the same as with engineering, is align yourself with a specific type of a law within a specific area of law, or but in most instances, virtually all disciplines have some aspect that has a legal footing. So again, it's not that one falls within that niche area. It is what you could contribute in terms of your discipline to a potential niche area. Okay. Good evening, Prof. Does the book applicable in consumer science hospitality study? Does the book applicable? Yes, I think you're asking, is the book applicable? Yes, you could use it in consumer sciences. Remember, we're talking about research and research principles and designs on a general level, and those general principles are the same. So if you want to do a qualitative study, the book would be fine, because it's all qualitative studies, or all books that addresses a qualitative study will have the same features. I'm busy writing a research book now for health professionals, but the basic principles is the same, whether I'm doing research in health for health professionals, or whether I do it in consumer sciences. You might find books specifically to consumer sciences, but the research methodologies and how to write a problem statement or objective is exactly the same. So I'm not saying you have to buy that book. If there is a good book in consumer sciences, hospitality, then that's fine. But the book that I mentioned is a good entry-level book. And you can definitely use it in consumer sciences as well, because it falls within the ambit of the book in the social sciences as well. Can we get our slides? Yes, I'm sure Daneo and the team still makes the slides available. I also know that it's on YouTube. All right. Thank you, Claire. Just to suggest one point on the niche areas, would it be possible to consider peace building and conflict resolution as one of the niche areas? It isn't one of the niche areas, but you can fit it into one of the niche areas. So the 10 niche areas that there are the areas of the university, but you can most definitely fit in peace building and conflict resolution into one of those catalytic niche areas for sure. Regarding literature review, what if the study is historical? And I think I've answered that, Musa. How does one craft the topic and title, or what's the difference? We refer to a topic as the broad phenomena that you are interested in, and the title is then very specifically addressing the more specific aspects that you intend to investigate. So a topic is a broad interest of a specific phenomena, but the title will be very specific as to what you are going to investigate, who you involving, or what is the outcome of your study. Okay. Good evening. Okay. For a person that's not been allocated a supervisor, is there a guide that one can use to start the proposal? Okay, what I would then suggest, and that's why I gave you the outline of a proposal up to your research questions. But I also gave you a broad outline that a proposal should consist of. So please just go back to the slides. There is a specific slide that gives you an outline of a proposal. So copy those headings and start populating those headings. You should be able to get on your way. Doing a literature review, that I'm also sure you should be able to do on your own. Okay. Regarding the literature review, okay, we've had the same question. I've answered that. What's the difference between theoretical framework and conceptual frameworks? You're really running ahead with your question. There's also a workshop. I don't know if I'll be doing it later, but there usually is a workshop there where we discuss what's the difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework. A theoretical framework is usually when we depart from a specific theory or theories, and a conceptual framework is something that we develop or come up with in the course of our research. So you could do your literature review and based on that have a conceptual framework. or develop a conceptual framework. You could also, the person that asked about the systematic literature review, at the end of that review, you might be able to develop a conceptual framework, or you might be able to develop a conceptual framework once you've analyzed your data, and that might be an outcome of your study. So a theoretical framework usually forms a theoretical departure of your study, but a conceptual framework is something that you develop during your research. Is there a standard font to be used? Yes, it is either Arial or New Times Roman. The font size is 12, and please justify your margins. Can a content analysis alone be used for a qualitative or quantitative method? Yeah, you could. Yeah. Does a quantitative study has inclusion and exclusion criteria? No, not specifically. Okay. All right. Danae has given you a link where you can find the recordings. What's the difference between a historical and theoretical background to write an introduction part? I think the words itself tells you historical is what happened before. Theoretical background, we don't really talk about a theoretical background. We talk about a background that contains theory or then literature. So you can either introduce your topic from a historical point of view, and then your literature would then be part of your study. When can you start applying for funding, and which external funding is available? Thapelo, there is, in terms of what external funding is available, millions of grants. So please, you can Google grants. There is some sites where you can put in your topic and title and ask Google, or there's other programs to find you a grant that's within that area. But the grants would be specific also to the discipline and your topic. So it's something that you can also investigate with your supervisor. The internal grants at UNISA is available as soon as your proposal has been accepted. So if your proposal has been accepted by the scientific committee, you can the next year apply for internal funding, and it would cover your registration fees. If you have ethical clearance, your funding could also then include research activities. So that's the internal. So as soon as you've received ethical clearance from the scientific committee, and the call usually comes out by the end of the year and early the next year, your supervisor is usually the person that now motivates for funding for you internally, if you have achieved those key stages. All right. But external, there's so much funding available. There's funding from the NRF, probably the most often used by students, but there is the grant and the funding game is really massive. So please speak to your supervisor, and they would maybe also be able to guide you in a specific direction. SLR, does it refer to use of specialized literature review databases, or does it refer to arranging your literature review systematically? No, it doesn't refer to arranging your literature review systematically. It's about following a certain methodology of doing a literature review. And it would include a lot more databases than just the Web of Science. So in your methodology, you would say what was your review question. So it would follow virtually the same process as your proposal outline. So you would have a question, you would have specific search engines or specific databases. You will also include in your write-up what was the key terms that you searched for. You will write up how many hits you got. You need to write up how you analyze the articles for inclusion, eventually what articles were included, and then what were your findings and your conclusions. So it has a very rigorous methodology to do a systematic review. It's not just writing up your literature in a systematic way. Your literature any literature should be written up in a systematic way. All right. I'm still waiting for my supervisor to contact me. I've written several emails. I was just wondering whether I should be concerned. As most students still await theirs as well. I'm a law master student. Yes, I'm very sorry that it's already this time of the year. I know it can be incredibly stressful. And yes, different departments take, more or less time to allocate students. But in the meantime, please use the information that you received in the workshop and maybe start writing a tentative proposal. I think you've got enough to at least start with something. If you have a tentative topic, please start exploring that so that when you are assigned a supervisor, you can hit the ground running, so to speak. Okay. What exactly does a literature survey entail, and what structure does it follow? People, I'm getting worried that we are going outside of the topic with a lot of conversations in terms of the literature review. The aim of this workshop wasn't on how to do a literature review. Okay, there will be specific workshops on literature review. So I've just covered some of it because it was a question from last night, but I don't think it's fair in terms of what the aim of this evening's workshop was to go into any more depth in terms of the literature reviews. I think you've got a basic understanding. Okay, I'm also not going to answer the question of where does development study fall. The idea isn't that a department or a specific field of research falls into a niche area or not. It can fall in any of those areas, and it's up to you to see how your research contributes to that niche areas. Are you strictly from getting a niche area bursary if you are involved in not taxed internship? No, you're not restricted. There isn't something like a niche area bursary. All right. Not in UNISA. So you won't get a bursary because you fall within a certain niche area. It is simply to put yourself within the research agenda of the university and contribute to that on a global and national level. So it's not a niche area bursary. The bursary internal is open to all students. External, you can then ask for funding within a specific field. But the interns, is an internship. Your bursaries are based on your research, your field of research. Okay, so the bursaries are for research purposes. I hope that clarifies. Okay, I think I've gone through all of the questions. Shall we give you another minute or two? If there is anything else burning, please quickly post it. But there will be other workshops, and there will be workshops specifically allocated to literature review, the different types of literature reviews. There will be workshops on methodologies, specific designs, qualitative, quantitative designs, mixed methods. There will be workshops on data collection, data analysis. So each of the areas that you need to touch on in your proposal. In your proposal, the methodology is briefly outlined. It's not in that much detail. You need to say what you're going to do and how and why and where and what. But it will later become a chapter. So please don't despair. There will be workshops that has a full-time allocation to these specific aspects. So the workshop of yesterday and tonight was specifically to address your research problem, your aims, objectives, and your research questions. All right, I allowed the other questions in terms of the literature review because I had some time to do it, but we need to also be mindful of what our mandate was for tonight's session. All right. There doesn't seem to be any new questions regarding the focus of tonight's research. I don't have any new questions on your problem statement or your questions or objectives. Okay, so from my side then, good evening. I hope you use your time tomorrow evening when you have free, constructively go and read, write, reread, refine, and that's the secret to writing your proposal is reading, writing, and refining, the 3 R's. Then from my side, have an excellent evening further. Good luck with your studies, and I hope that your supervisors are appointed soon and that you can get on your way. But there's certainly enough information for you to get a start. All right, take care and keep well.